Imagine waking up in the medieval ages, long before the advent of modern plumbing and sanitation. The air is thick with the scent of unwashed bodies, and there's no fresh water at your fingertips to wash away the grime. Welcome to a world where hygiene was a luxury that most couldn't afford, and survival depended on much more than just clean clothes or fresh skin. In this world, being clean was not a priority. Survival was. In this video, we're about to uncover the shocking truths about hygiene in medieval times, one of the darkest yet fascinating aspects of history. Medieval hygiene was nothing like what we experience today. Unlike modern times, when hygiene and cleanliness are part of everyday life, people in the medieval ages struggled with basic sanitation. Most of the population lived in conditions that today we would consider unsanitary. While a small percentage of the upper class could afford luxuries like baths, the common folk were left to cope with a lack of proper hygiene. Imagine not being able to wash your hands after meals or even after using the bathroom. This was the reality for most people in the medieval period. One of the most significant hygiene issues of the time was the absence of personal bathing habits. While the ancient Romans had public baths, these had all but disappeared by the medieval period. People didn't bathe regularly, and many believed that bathing was not only unnecessary, but potentially harmful. The medieval belief was that water could open the pores and let in harmful spirits or diseases, which, in their eyes, would worsen health. As a result, people went without baths for weeks, months, and sometimes even years. To make matters worse, the idea of soap as we know it was only starting to emerge. Instead of using soap, people used ashes, herbs, and sometimes animal fats to clean themselves, which wasn't nearly as effective in removing dirt or germs. In some cases, people relied on perfumes or scented oils to mask their body odor. It wasn't uncommon for people to cover up their smell with heavy layers of clothing or even potpourri, especially during religious ceremonies or social gatherings. However, it's important to note that not all medieval people were unaware of hygiene's importance. Some regions, particularly in the Islamic world, had a more advanced understanding of cleanliness and sanitation. In cities like Baghdad, public baths were common, and scholars were already writing about hygiene and disease prevention. But for the majority of people in Europe, hygiene was still a distant concern. Hygiene practices were rudimentary at best, and most people simply had to deal with the filth around them. The lack of proper hygiene wasn't just uncomfortable, it led to serious health problems. Without the ability to wash or sanitize themselves, medieval people became breeding grounds for disease. Fleas, lice, and other pests were common, and it was not unusual for people to suffer from skin infections, rashes, and boils. These pests often spread illnesses like the plague, which wreaked havoc on Europe during the Middle Ages. With poor sanitation and the lack of modern medicine, survival was a daily struggle. In addition to personal hygiene, there was little attention given to public sanitation. In many towns and villages, waste disposal was rudimentary. People often dumped waste directly into the streets, and without proper sewer systems, human waste and garbage were left to fester in public spaces. This lack of sanitation contributed to the spread of diseases like dysentery, cholera, and the Black Death, which decimated populations across Europe. The stench of the streets was overwhelming, and people had no way to escape the filth that surrounded them. Now, imagine being a child in this environment. Children were especially vulnerable to the diseases that spread so easily in these unsanitary conditions. Infant mortality rates were high, and many children never lived to see adulthood. For the few who survived childhood, they grew up in an environment where cleanliness was a luxury, not a necessity. Despite these grim realities, there were occasional moments of reprieve. Wealthy individuals who had access to private baths or running water could at least cleanse themselves regularly. However, this was a small percentage of the population. Most people relied on communal wells or rivers for water, but they had to share these resources with animals and waste. It was a grim cycle, and the impact on people's health was profound. As we delve deeper into this dark chapter of history, we'll uncover more truths about what life was really like in medieval times. From the lack of proper hygiene to the way people survived harsh winters, we'll explore how people lived in a world so different from our own. In the next section, we'll take a closer look at how the medieval people survived in such brutal conditions, and how their hygiene practices played a significant role in their day-to-day. Now that we've explored the grim realities of medieval hygiene, let's shift our focus to another daunting challenge that people faced during this time: the brutal winters. Surviving the long, cold winters in medieval Europe was no easy feat. The harsh conditions, combined with a lack of modern heating systems and proper clothing, made winter a perilous season for the common folk. Imagine living in a small stone cottage with a thatched roof, the cold seeping through the cracks. The days are short, and the nights are long and freezing. There is no central heating or insulation, and the only source of warmth is a small fire that burns in the hearth. People huddled around these fires, hoping to stave off the chill, but it was often not enough to keep the bitter cold at bay. The cold could easily penetrate the thin walls of medieval homes, making life inside just as uncomfortable as life outside. Food was another major concern during the winter months. With limited access to fresh produce and no refrigeration, preserving food for the long winter months was a matter of life or death. Most people relied on salted meat, dried fish, and stored grains to make it through. Vegetables like cabbage and turnips could be stored in cellars, but once these reserves ran out, people often had to make do with what they could grow or hunt. Without proper storage methods, food could spoil quickly, leaving families without essential nourishment. But the cold wasn't the only thing people had to worry about. The winters were long, and the snow could bury entire villages under thick layers, making travel nearly impossible. Trade routes became impassable, and people were often cut off from supplies. Without proper transportation, even simple tasks like getting food or firewood could become a life-threatening ordeal. In these isolated conditions, survival depended on community cooperation. Neighbours helped each other, sharing resources and shelter when needed. To stay warm, people wore layers of wool and fur, which were often the only materials available. Wool was a natural insulator, helping to trap body heat and keep people warm. However, the clothes were often heavy and uncomfortable, and due to limited access to soap, they were rarely washed. This led to an accumulation of sweat, dirt, and odours. As you can imagine, this only made the already difficult winter conditions even more unbearable. The smell of unwashed bodies, wet wool, and wood smoke filled the air, making it hard to escape the discomfort of both the physical cold and the stench. For the wealthier classes, things weren't much better, but they had access to warmer homes and finer clothes. They could afford more luxurious furs and better food, but they still faced the same challenges of surviving harsh winters. Even with the occasional luxury, medieval winters were a constant battle against nature. People had to be resourceful and prepared, but even then, survival wasn't guaranteed. The winter months were also a breeding ground for illness. With the cold came weakened immune systems, and with a lack of sanitation and proper hygiene, diseases spread quickly. The cold and dampness created the perfect environment for respiratory infections, pneumonia, and the flu. The lack of proper medical care meant that even small illnesses could turn fatal. This harsh reality made every winter feel like a fight for survival. In addition to the health risks, the winter season also brought about a sense of isolation. With roads blocked by snow and limited daylight, medieval people often spent weeks confined to their homes. This isolation contributed to a sense of helplessness and despair, especially for those without family or community support. It was a time of great mental and emotional strain. Despite these hardships, People in the medieval ages developed unique strategies for coping with the winter. They created insulated homes, made use of natural resources like animal skins and wool, and relied on community bonds to get through the toughest months. They learned how to make the most out of limited resources and found ways to survive in an environment that seemed unforgiving and hostile. But winter wasn't just a time of physical survival, it was also a time for reflection and resilience. In the quiet of the cold, people often turned to their faith for comfort, seeking solace in religious practices and community gatherings. The harshness of winter became a reminder of the fragility of life, but also of the strength and endurance of the human spirit. As we continue to explore medieval life, we'll take a closer look at what daily routines were like for people who lived in such an unforgiving world. From their hygiene practices to their survival tactics, we'll uncover more secrets about what it took to live in the medieval era. Medieval dating, a world of tradition, social norms, and courtship. Now that we've examined the physical challenges of medieval life, let's dive into another fascinating and sometimes shocking aspect of this time: dating and courtship. What did it mean to find love, companionship, or even a marriage partner during the medieval period? The rules were much different than what we experience today, and the concept of romance was shaped by society, religion, and, of course, survival. In medieval times, dating as we know it didn't exist. The idea of casually meeting someone and going on dates was far removed from the realities of life back then. Instead, courtship was a structured and often formal process, deeply influenced by social classes, family expectations, and religion. Love wasn't the primary factor in a marriage. Rather, social standing, family alliances, and securing a future were the primary motivations for marriage. For the lower classes, marriages were often arranged by parents or community leaders. Romantic love was seen as secondary, if it was considered at all. Marriages were seen more as practical arrangements for survival, and the focus was on creating stable family units. Parents often arranged marriages when children were very young, with little regard for personal feelings or preferences. As a result, the idea of dating, as we understand it, didn't exist. In many cases, the groom and bride didn't meet each other until the wedding ceremony itself. For the wealthier classes, while social status still played a crucial role in the arrangement of marriages, there was more room for personal choice. Wealthy families might use courtship as a way to form strategic alliances, but there were also instances of love playing a role in these unions. However, love was often considered something that grew over time, and it wasn't the driving force behind most marriages. In fact, many marriages were based on the need for heirs or alliances rather than emotional connection. Courtship rituals in medieval times were much more formal and regulated than today's casual dating culture. For instance, in the more noble classes, young men were expected to demonstrate their worthiness by showing off their strength, skills, and loyalty. These displays of strength were often part of a formal courtship process, where men competed in tournaments, jousts, or other public displays of skill to win the favour of a lady. However, for women, the process was very different. Courtship was often about demonstrating virtue, modesty, and respect for family traditions. A woman's reputation was crucial, and any sign of impropriety could ruin her chances of marrying well. When it came to actual interaction between men and women, physical contact was extremely limited. It wasn't until after marriage that couples were expected to have sexual relations. Before marriage, women were expected to maintain their chastity, and men were expected to respect these boundaries. In fact, a woman's virginity was considered a symbol of her purity and worth. These expectations were closely tied to religious teachings, which held that premarital sex was sinful and immoral. When a man and woman did meet, the courtship process often involved chaperones. Public displays of affection, such as holding hands or kissing, were not the norm. Instead, Conversations were usually conducted through formal exchanges of letters or poetry. This meant that courtship was as much about intellectual compatibility and shared values as it was about emotional attraction. Many couples would court for years before getting married, with long periods of engagement or betrothal. Religion played a central role in courtship and marriage. The church had a strong influence on medieval life, and marriage was considered a sacred institution ordained by God. As such, the church had strict rules about who could marry, when they could marry, and even how many children they could have. The church also had the power to annul marriages if they deemed them invalid. For those who couldn't find a marriage partner, monastic life offered an alternative. Nuns and monks devoted their lives to prayer, religious service, and isolation from the secular world. For many, the idea of marrying for love was a luxury. The majority of the population married for security, to protect their family's future, and to ensure that their lineage continued. This sense of practicality extended beyond marriage to the very idea of dating or finding a partner. In a world where survival was the priority, courtship was more about social structure than romantic fantasy. Despite the strict rules and social expectations surrounding dating, the medieval period was not devoid of romantic love. Stories of knights and ladies, tragic love affairs, and epic romances filled literature and the imaginations of many. In fact, the concept of courtly love was idealized in medieval literature. Survival in the medieval world, a daily struggle for life. Having explored the harsh realities of hygiene and dating in medieval times, it's now time to take a deep dive into how people survived the brutal conditions of the era. The medieval world was unforgiving, and survival was a daily struggle. From famine and disease to the constant battle against the elements, life was harsh and often short. In this section, we'll uncover how medieval people managed to stay alive, from their basic survival tactics to the resilience they demonstrated in the face of adversity. Let's begin with one of the most important aspects of medieval survival: food. For the majority of the population, food was scarce, and many families relied on the land to feed themselves. The medieval economy was largely agrarian, and peasants worked the fields to grow grains, vegetables, and livestock. Farming was backbreaking work, and the labor was done without the aid of modern machinery. Without reliable harvests, many families faced hunger, especially in the winter months when food stocks would dwindle. The threat of famine was always looming, and crop failure could lead to devastating consequences. When bad harvests occurred, famine could wipe out entire villages. The medieval climate was unpredictable, and prolonged droughts or harsh winters could ruin crops. Without modern irrigation or farming techniques, the survival of a family often depended on the size of the harvest. Those who couldn't grow their own food relied on market fairs, where food was sold at high prices. But when famine struck, even the wealthiest families could suffer. Meat was a luxury for many medieval families. The poor might only have meat during feast days or special occasions, while the wealthier classes enjoyed it regularly. The main source of meat for the lower classes came from hunting or raising livestock, but hunting was often restricted by laws. The nobility held hunting rights to forests, leaving peasants with few opportunities to hunt game. In addition to meat, dairy products like cheese and milk were also important, though many people couldn't afford them. During periods of hunger, people turned to preserved food like salted meats, pickled vegetables, and dried fruits. These methods of preservation helped keep people alive during harsh winters when fresh food was unavailable. But even preserved food was often limited and wasn't as nutritious as fresh produce. As a result, malnutrition was common, and diseases like scurvy, caused by a lack of vitamin C, were widespread. Now, let's turn our attention to another essential factor in survival: protection from the elements. Without modern heating systems, people had to rely on open fires to stay warm during the cold months. In medieval homes, the fire was the center of daily life, providing warmth and cooking food. But fires were difficult to maintain. and the cold often crept into homes, leaving families shivering in the winter months. Homes were poorly insulated, and the roofs and walls allowed drafts to enter, making life uncomfortable year-round. During the winter, people used heavy woolen blankets, fur pelts, and layered clothing to protect themselves from the chill. Wool was one of the few materials that provided adequate insulation, but it was also difficult to maintain cleanliness. People rarely washed their clothes due to the difficulty of doing so without access to water and soap. The stench of unwashed bodies and clothes was a constant companion during the cold months, and the thick layers of clothing only trapped heat and sweat, leading to more discomfort. The brutal medieval winters were also a threat to survival in another way. They often led to outbreaks of disease. The cold, damp conditions were perfect breeding grounds for illnesses, and the lack of sanitation made it easy for diseases to spread. Medieval people had no understanding of germs or bacteria, and without modern medicine, even minor illnesses could turn fatal. Respiratory infections, pneumonia, and the flu were common, and without the ability to wash hands or properly treat wounds, infections spread quickly. In addition to the cold and disease, medieval people were constantly at risk from other threats, such as war and invasion. The medieval period was marked by frequent conflicts between kingdoms, and many people lived in fear of raids, invasions, and battles. Castles and fortifications were built to protect the nobility and their lands, but the common people often had no such protection. When wars broke out, villages were pillaged, crops destroyed, and people forced to flee for their lives. The constant threat of violence added another layer of anxiety to an already difficult life. But despite the hardships, medieval people demonstrated incredible resilience. They learned to adapt to their environment, finding ways to make the best of their circumstances. As to endurance of medieval life, lessons from the Dark Ages and how they shape us today as we wrap up our exploration of medieval hygiene, survival, and courtship. It's clear that the people of the Dark Ages faced challenges that we can hardly imagine. The struggle to survive in such a harsh, unyielding environment required extraordinary resilience, resourcefulness, and a deep sense of community. Despite the hardships they endured, the medieval period left behind lessons that still influence the world today. So, what can we take away from this era, and how does it shape the world we live in now? First, let's reflect on the incredible endurance of the people who lived through these times. Despite the lack of modern technology, medicine, and comfort, medieval people found ways to survive, adapt, and even thrive in their own way. They lived in a world where every day was a battle against the elements, disease, and social expectations. But they learned to work together, make the most of what little they had, and find meaning in their struggle for survival. Their daily lives were marked by a sense of resilience that is still a source of inspiration today. One of the most significant lessons we can take from the medieval period is the importance of community. In the medieval world, survival was often a communal effort. Neighbours helped each other, shared resources, and provided shelter during times of crisis. In an era where isolation was common, people relied on their families, churches, and local networks for support. The strength of these communities allowed them to endure some of the most difficult conditions imaginable. This sense of togetherness and mutual aid is something that we can still apply to our lives today. In times of crisis, it's important to remember that we are stronger together and that the bonds we form with others are essential to our well-being. Another valuable lesson from the medieval period is the importance of resilience in the face of adversity. The people of the Dark Ages didn't have the luxury of modern conveniences or scientific knowledge, but they managed to survive through their ability to adapt to their environment. They learned to make the most of their resources, whether it was through the use of natural materials for clothing or the preservation of food for the winter months. They understood the necessity of hard work and the importance of preparing for the future. This resilience in the face of challenges is something we can all learn from, especially in today's world where uncertainty and change are constant. While hygiene may not have been a priority for the majority of people in medieval times, it's fascinating to see how far we've come. Modern society places a high value on cleanliness and personal hygiene, and it's something many of us take for granted. But the medieval period shows us how essential hygiene is for health and survival. The simple act of washing hands or bathing regularly has had an enormous impact on public health throughout history. From the invention of soap to the development of modern sanitation systems, we can trace many of today's hygiene practices back to lessons learned during the medieval period. Similarly, the way people approached courtship and relationships in the medieval world offers insights into the evolution of romantic ideals. While love and marriage were often seen as practical matters in medieval society, the concept of romantic love, as we understand it today, began to take shape during this time. Medieval tales of knights, chivalry, and courtly love influenced how we view love and relationships in the modern world. Today, we see a greater emphasis on romantic love, but it's important to remember that these ideas have roots in the medieval period, where they were nurtured through literature and social norms. Finally, the medieval world reminds us of the fragility of life and the importance of making the most of our time. People in the Dark Ages lived under constant threat from disease, war, and the harshness of nature. Life expectancy was much shorter than it is today, and every day was a gift. In the modern world, where many of us have longer life expectancies and greater access to healthcare, it's easy to take our time for granted. But the medieval period offers a poignant reminder to appreciate what we have, to cherish our loved ones, and to live with purpose. As we conclude this journey through the Dark Ages, it's important to remember that history is not just a collection of facts and dates. It's a mirror that reflects who we are today. The struggles, resilience, and ingenuity of medieval people have shaped the world we live in, and their stories continue to inspire us. The lessons we've learned from the past can help us navigate the challenges of the present and future as we strive to build a better, more resilient world. Hi there. If you're here to relax or sleep, you're in the right place. Let me gently take you through the forgotten story of spoons. Yes, those simple, everyday utensils that you probably never gave a second thought to. But tonight, you'll slowly trudge through time with me, exploring how this unassuming tool came to shape the way humans eat, live, and maybe even think. Imagine yourself stepping back tens of thousands of years, long before fancy forks or knives, even before the luxury of ceramic bowls or metal plates. Back then, eating was a messy, hands-on affair. People scooped food straight from pots or hunted prey, ripping and tearing with their teeth and fingers. The idea of a spoon was yet to be born. You probably wouldn't last long in such a world, but hey, that's why you're here, to drift softly through this story without the hunger or the dirt. Historians still argue whether the earliest spoons were shaped from bones, shells, or simple curved pieces of wood. The debate is ongoing because spoons don't fossilize well like stone tools, but evidence points to humans using scooping tools as far back as 100,000 years ago, maybe even earlier. Picture an early human by the campfire, grasping a curved piece of animal bone to scoop up hot, stewed meat or watery broth. Definitely not as elegant as your polished stainless steel spoon, but it worked. These ancient spoons were rough, unrefined, and wildly practical. There was no concern about how they looked. Function was all that mattered. The edges were jagged, handles sometimes awkward or short, but they brought a small whisper of order to the chaotic business of eating. Think about it. A tool designed just for scooping. Humanity's first real step towards civilized dining. What's fascinating and slightly amusing is how this tiny invention slowly shaped social customs. Spoons allowed food to be passed around, shared more cleanly, and eaten without dirty fingers. In a way, spoons were a social equalizer, helping communities gather and share meals, softening the rough edges of survival. So when you next cradle a spoon in your hand, remember you're holding a piece of human progress, quiet, humble, and unassuming. The story doesn't end here though. Over the next few sections, we'll explore how spoons evolved from these primitive beginnings to become objects of art, symbols of status, and everyday essentials worldwide. From ancient Egypt's gold spoons shaped like fish, to medieval Europe's ornately carved handles, spoons have quietly mirrored our changing cultures and technologies. For now, close your eyes a little and picture that campfire again. The glow flickers on a rough bone scoop, warming your fingers. You're connected to a line stretching through time, from early survival to modern comfort, all thanks to this little tool. As you sink deeper into this slow history, remember, it's not just about spoons. It's about how humanity learned to eat a bit more gently. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, why not drop your location and local time in the comments? It's always fun to know where in the world we're all drifting off from tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Hi there. If you're here to relax or sleep, you're in the right place. Let me gently take you through the forgotten story of spoons. Yes, those simple, everyday utensils that you probably never gave a second thought to. But tonight, you'll slowly trudge through time with me, exploring how this unassuming tool came to shape the way humans eat, live, and maybe even think. Imagine yourself stepping back tens of thousands of years, long before fancy forks or knives, even before the luxury of ceramic bowls or metal plates. Back then, eating was a messy, hands-on affair. People scooped food straight from pots or hunted prey, ripping and tearing with their teeth and fingers. The idea of a spoon was yet to be born. You probably wouldn't last long in such a world, but hey, that's why you're here, to drift softly through this story without the hunger or the dirt. Historians still argue whether the earliest spoons were shaped from bones, shells, or simple curved pieces of wood. The debate is ongoing because spoons don't fossilize well like stone tools, but evidence points to humans using scooping tools as far back as 100,000 years ago, maybe even earlier. Picture an early human by the campfire, grasping a curved piece of animal bone to scoop up hot, stewed meat or watery broth. Definitely not as elegant as your polished stainless steel spoon, but it worked. These ancient spoons were rough, unrefined, and wildly practical. There was no concern about how they looked. Function was all that mattered. The edges were jagged, handles sometimes awkward or short, but they brought a small whisper of order to the chaotic business of eating. Think about it. A tool designed just for scooping. Humanity's first real step towards civilized dining. What's fascinating and slightly amusing is how this tiny invention slowly shaped social customs. Spoons allowed food to be passed around, shared more cleanly, and eaten without dirty fingers. In a way, spoons were a social equalizer, helping communities gather and share meals, softening the rough edges of survival. So when you next cradle a spoon in your hand, remember you're holding a piece of human progress, quiet, humble, and unassuming. The story doesn't end here though. Over the next few sections, we'll explore how spoons evolved from these primitive beginnings to become objects of art, symbols of status, and everyday essentials worldwide. From ancient Egypt's gold spoons shaped like fish, to medieval Europe's ornately carved handles, spoons have quietly mirrored our changing cultures and technologies. For now, close your eyes a little and picture that campfire again. The glow flickers on a rough bone scoop, warming your fingers. You're connected to a line stretching through time, from early survival to modern comfort, all thanks to this little tool. As you sink deeper into this slow history, remember, it's not just about spoons. It's about how humanity learned to eat a bit more gently. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, why not drop your location and local time in the comments? It's always fun to know where in the world we're all drifting off from tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Now that you've got a taste of the spoon's ancient origins, let's move on to a surprising chapter. How spoons played a role in the grand dining rituals of ancient Rome. You might picture Romans as all about gladiators and togas, but their dining habits were just as fascinating, and a bit extravagant when it came to utensils. Picture yourself reclining on a plush couch in a Roman villa, surrounded by the clatter of silverware and the hum of conversation. Dinner parties, or convivia, were grand affairs, and spoons were an essential part of the experience. The Romans didn't just eat to survive, they dined to impress, and their spoons reflected that flair. Unlike the humble wooden or bone spoons of earlier times, Roman spoons were often made from bronze, silver, or even gold. Some were plain, but others were ornately decorated with intricate engravings of mythological scenes or geometric patterns. One curious fact about Roman spoons is that many had long handles, sometimes ending in a small spoon at one end and a pointed pick at the other. This double-ended design was practical for the Roman table. It allowed diners to scoop up soft foods like eggs or fish with one end and use the pointed tip to pick out small delicacies like shellfish or snails. It's a bit like having a built-in multi-tool on your dining table, centuries before Swiss Army knives were even dreamed of. But here's the twist. Spoons were not just tools for eating, but also carried symbolic weight. Wealthy Romans sometimes gifted spoons as tokens of friendship or favour, and these gifts were often finely crafted, personalised, and treasured. There's even evidence that some spoons bore inscriptions with witty or poetic messages, adding a playful or sentimental layer to these everyday objects. The social importance of spoons at Roman dinners can't be overstated. It wasn't just about function, but about signalling your place in the social order. Bringing your own silver spoon to a feast was a way to announce your status. Imagine the ancient equivalent of showing up with the latest smartphone or luxury watch. The phrase, "born with a silver spoon in your mouth," probably finds some of its roots in this Roman culture, where such items were symbols of privilege and wealth. Historians still debate how widespread the use of metal spoons was among different classes in Rome. While the wealthy clearly had access to luxurious utensils, it's unclear how common such spoons were among everyday citizens. Some argue that most people use simple wooden or bone spoons, while others suggest that metal spoons were more accessible than previously thought, especially in urban centres. Interestingly, Roman spoons also highlight early concerns about hygiene and health. Some spoons were designed with handles long enough to avoid contact with the mouth when passing dishes around the table, reflecting an awareness of germs, or at least a desire for cleanliness. It's funny to think about the ancient Romans worrying about something we often forget at the dinner table today. So, as you get cozy and the world outside softens into quiet, imagine yourself at that Roman feast, slowly lifting a gleaming spoon, feeling the weight of history in your hand, and tasting not just the food but centuries of culture and social nuance. That simple utensil in your hand has danced through the pages of history, a silent witness to human connection and civilization. As you settle deeper into this slow journey through time, let's take a detour to a less glamorous but equally fascinating use of spoons: medicine. Yes, the humble spoon wasn't just about eating. It also played a vital role in healing and health practices throughout history. Imagine yourself in a medieval apothecary's dimly lit shop. Shelves line the walls, filled with jars of herbs, powders, and mysterious liquids. Among the tools cluttering the workspace, a simple spoon waits patiently. In those days, medicine was often administered in liquid form. Herbal teas, tinctures, and potions that needed careful measuring and dispensing. Spoons were the essential vessels for delivering these doses accurately and safely. The term medicine spoon actually comes from this history. These spoons were often made of silver, believed to have antibacterial properties, or other metals thought to enhance the healing process. Some had small bowls, perfect for measuring out exact doses. The apothecaries and doctors of the time trusted these spoons as much as their own knowledge, because dosage precision could mean the difference between cure and catastrophe. But here's a quirky twist. In some cultures, spoons used for medicine had special symbolic carvings or shapes. For example, in parts of Asia, spoons might be decorated with images of dragons or phoenixes, symbols meant to invoke protection and strength. Others had long handles, so they could reach deep into narrow bottles or jars, a practical design born of necessity. One intriguing debate among historians is about the spoon theory of early pharmaceutical practices, whether spoons were actually standardized enough in size to ensure consistent dosing, or if it was more of a guesswork affair. Some argue that people's trust in these spoons was more faith than fact, relying on the apothecary's skill rather than the tool's precision. Others believe that early metalworking was advanced enough to create fairly consistent measures, even if not to modern scientific standards. Meanwhile, the spoon's role in medicine influenced everyday language and customs. Ever heard someone say, "Take it with a spoonful of sugar"? That phrase hints at the ancient practice of mixing bitter medicine with sweet substances to make it more palatable, often served with the trusty spoon. It's a reminder that spoons help not only deliver medicine, but also ease the patient's discomfort. So, as you relax tonight, picture yourself in that quiet, smoky apothecary shop, the faint smell of herbs and old wood surrounding you, as the spoon gently lifts a healing potion to your lips. It's a small but mighty tool, quietly bridging the worlds of health and history, a reminder of humanity's endless quest to cure and comfort. Let's now wander over to a curious chapter in spoon history that involves both superstition and social status. You probably never thought a simple spoon could carry such weight in society, but it did, big time. From medieval Europe to far-flung islands, spoons were more than just eating utensils. They were symbols, tokens, and sometimes even talismans. Imagine yourself in a bustling medieval village market. A merchant offers a carved wooden spoon, not just for eating, but as a sign of goodwill or courtship. In many cultures, giving a spoon could be an intimate gesture, symbolizing a promise or a bond. The love spoon, for example, became a tradition in Wales. These beautifully carved spoons were presented as gifts to loved ones, each design holding a secret meaning. Hearts, knots, and keys were common motifs, signaling love, unity, and unlocking the heart. Receiving one was like being handed a piece of someone's affection and artistry all at once. On the other hand, spoons were markers of social rank. During the Renaissance period, nobles often carried elaborate spoons made of silver or gold, decorated with precious stones and intricate engravings. These spoons weren't just for dining, they were status symbols displayed at grand feasts and banquets. Sometimes, they even had family crests etched into their handles, a subtle way to boast lineage without uttering a word. But here's a quirky bit. In some cultures, it was considered unlucky to lend your spoon to someone else. The fear was that you might lose not just the spoon, but also your good fortune or health. Spoons became personal and protective objects, sometimes even buried with their owners, much like jewelry or keepsakes. Historians still debate how much of these practices were widespread and how much were localized customs. Some argue that love spoons and status spoons were mainly ceremonial, used only on special occasions, while others believe they played a significant role in daily life, shaping relationships and social interactions. The spoon's symbolism continues even today. Ever heard the phrase, "born with a silver spoon in your mouth"? It's a direct nod to those old class distinctions. The humble spoon quietly shaped not just meals, but the very fabric of social and emotional connection throughout history. So, as you sink further into your cozy spot tonight, picture those carved love spoons, the glint of silver spoons at royal tables, and the personal stories wrapped around each one. The spoon's journey is far from boring. It's rich with love, power, and mystery. Now, as you settle deeper into this gentle tale, let's explore how spoons morphed alongside human innovation and changing lifestyles. You might think spoons have always been the same, just a simple tool to shovel food into your mouth. But in reality, their shape, material, and purpose evolved dramatically through the ages. Take the shift from ancient wooden and bone spoons to the gleaming metal ones you're familiar with today. Around 1000 BCE, metalworking skills advanced enough for early civilizations like the Egyptians and Romans to craft spoons from bronze, silver, and even gold. These weren't just for eating. They were often ceremonial, designed to impress gods or flaunt wealth. Imagine holding a delicate silver spoon, etched with intricate patterns, feeling the cool metal slide against your fingers. It wasn't merely functional, it was a piece of art, a status statement. Egyptian spoons, for example, sometimes featured lotus flower designs, symbolizing rebirth and purity, showing how the spoon transcended mere utility to become a spiritual object. But not everyone had access to such luxury. For everyday folk, spoons remained rough-hewn, made from wood or bone, sometimes carved by hand. Those spoons could be awkward, with uneven edges and imperfect bowls, but they did the job. In fact, in many rural parts of the world, hand-carved wooden spoons remain common even today, a testament to tradition and sustainability. You can almost imagine the slow carving process, the scent of fresh wood filling a quiet workshop, as the artisan shapes each spoon by hand, an intimate connection between human and tool. Then there's the evolution of the spoon's shape. Ever wonder why your spoon isn't just a simple flat piece? Over centuries, the bowl deepened and the handle lengthened, adapting to different culinary cultures and eating habits. The Vikings, for instance, crafted spoons with long, slender handles, perfect for fishing in deep pots or reaching into narrow containers. Meanwhile, Asian spoons often have a wider, flatter bowl designed for sipping soups, a shape quite different from the Western style. These differences in design reveal fascinating insights into how people ate, what they valued, and how spoons became tailored tools in each culture's culinary story. Interestingly, the debate among historians centers on whether these design changes happened mostly due to practicality or cultural symbolism. Did spoons evolve simply because people needed better tools? Or were the changes also about status, ceremony, and identity? Some scholars argue that spoons were crafted to reflect social changes as much as functional needs, like mini-mirrors of the societies that shaped them. For example, the ornate silver spoons of medieval Europe didn't just feed the wealthy, they also reinforced social hierarchies, communicating wealth and power at the dinner table. Today, we take for granted the smooth, standardized spoon we grab from a drawer. But that design is the result of thousands of years of trial, error, and cultural significance. Next time you scoop your cereal or stir your tea, think about that long journey. A simple spoon, shaped by human hands and history, delivering nourishment and connection. And perhaps, as you feel the cool metal or smooth wood in your hand, you'll sense the echo of all those generations who came before. Each spoon telling a quiet story of human ingenuity and daily life. Let's move forward and examine how spoons traveled along with human migration and trade, becoming global ambassadors of culture and cuisine. Picture this: ancient traders, caravan drivers, or sailors journeying for months, carrying spices, textiles, and yes, their trusty spoons. These simple utensils were more than just eating tools. They were practical companions that helped people eat unfamiliar foods in strange lands. When the Silk Road flourished between Asia and Europe, spoons made from different materials and styles mingled as cultures met. For example, Chinese spoons, traditionally made of porcelain, with a short handle and broad, flat bowl, found their way westward, introducing a new aesthetic and function. Meanwhile, the Western-style metal spoons traveled east, influencing local craft traditions. It's fascinating to think about a spoon as a symbol of cultural exchange, quietly bridging gaps between vastly different peoples over centuries. Mariners played a crucial role in this global spoon saga. Imagine a sailor on a wooden ship in the 15th century, using a wooden spoon carved from driftwood or leftover ship timber to eat salted meat stew. Spoons had to be durable and portable, sometimes even doubling as measuring tools for rationing supplies. Some ships carried sets of pewter or brass spoons, polished to a shine, as prized possessions. These spoons bore marks or engravings, serving as identifiers or lucky charms. They tell stories of hardship, adventure, and survival on the high seas, proving that spoons were trusted companions in the most challenging conditions. Yet, the story doesn't stop there. Colonialism introduced European-style cutlery, including spoons, into indigenous cultures worldwide, often replacing or blending with traditional eating implements. This exchange was not always smooth. Sometimes spoons became symbols of cultural imposition, while in other contexts, locals adapted them creatively. In Africa, for example, spoons carved from gourds or wood coexisted alongside imported metal spoons, resulting in hybrid designs rich with symbolism. The Industrial Revolution was another turning point for spoons. Before industrialization, spoons were handmade, which made them expensive and often heirlooms passed down generations. The rise of factories in the 18th and 19th centuries meant spoons could be mass-produced, making them affordable for the average family. This democratization changed not only who owned spoons, but also what kinds were available. Silver-plated stainless steel and nickel spoons flooded markets. This shift also led to the creation of specialized spoons: teaspoons, dessert spoons, soup spoons, and more. Historians still debate the exact timelines and paths spoons took on these trade routes. Some argue spoons spread rapidly, while others suggest a slower, patchy diffusion influenced by politics and economics. What's clear, though, is that spoons are a quiet but potent thread weaving through human history. connecting people across time and geography through the simple act of eating. By now, you might be wondering, how did spoons evolve from simple carved sticks and shells into the diverse forms we know today? Well, the story unfolds with a mix of artistry, necessity, and even a pinch of superstition. In medieval Europe, spoons were often carved from wood, bone, or horn, but for the wealthiest, silver spoons were a sign of status and power. Owning a silver spoon was more than just about eating, it was a statement. That's where the phrase, "born with a silver spoon in your mouth," comes from, meaning someone born into privilege. But did you know that during certain times, owning silver spoons was also about hygiene? Back then, diseases spread easily through shared eating utensils, so personal spoons helped prevent illness. Interestingly, spoon shapes began to change as cuisines evolved. For instance, the round-bowled spoon was ideal for broths and soups, while a flatter spoon worked better for thicker, chunkier foods like stews or porridges. The handle length and curvature adapted depending on the eating style of the culture and the dish served. This practical evolution shows how spoons were molded by the needs of daily life, rather than mere decoration. A quirky tidbit. In some cultures, spoons also doubled as musical instruments or storytelling props. In parts of Eastern Europe and Russia, wooden spoons were used in folk music, clapped together rhythmically, or scraped on surfaces to create percussive sounds. Imagine a quiet village night where families gathered, sharing stories and songs, punctuated by the gentle tapping of spoons. Who would have thought that spoons could be so versatile? Meanwhile, in Japan, lacquered spoons with exquisite designs were prized for their craftsmanship, showing how utensils can be both functional and beautiful art pieces. Such spoons were often gifted during ceremonies, symbolizing goodwill and respect. This dual role of spoons as tools and cultural artifacts highlights their deep-rooted place in human life. But not all spoon stories are so rosy. Historians still argue whether certain ancient spoon-like tools were purely utilitarian or held religious or magical significance. Some archaeological finds suggest that spoons were used in rituals, possibly to hold sacred liquids or powders. So next time you scoop your cereal, consider that your spoon might be channeling millennia of mysterious traditions. All this to say, spoons are far from boring. They're little capsules of history, culture, and even a bit of magic right in your kitchen drawer. As we glide deeper into the tale of spoons, let's explore a fascinating twist. How spoons became a battlefield of social customs and etiquette. Yes, those everyday utensils were once the centre of etiquette drama, and their use could even cause scandal at royal courts. In the 17th and 18th centuries, dining manners began to shape the way people used spoons. It wasn't just about eating anymore, it was about how you presented yourself to the world. In aristocratic Europe, etiquette manuals taught that you should never blow on your soup, but instead let it cool naturally, preferably while holding your spoon delicately between thumb and forefinger. A misplaced spoon could signal poor breeding or a lack of refinement. Royal courts often had specially designed spoons for each type of dish: soup spoons, dessert spoons, and even spoons meant just for caviar. Some spoons had ornate designs, encrusted with gems or inscribed with family crests. Imagine the pressure of using your spoon perfectly when the Queen's eyes were on you. Oddly enough, spoons were also involved in more personal social customs. In Victorian England, a man might present a silver spoon to a lady as a token of affection or courtship. The size, decoration, and material of the spoon spoke volumes. a tiny, delicately engraved spoon could mean deep admiration, while a plain wooden spoon might mean something entirely different, perhaps friendship or family ties. Meanwhile, in some Asian cultures, spoons were used alongside chopsticks, but etiquette differed vastly. For example, in Korea, it's customary to use a long-handled metal spoon for rice and soups, while chopsticks handle side dishes. Using these utensils properly shows respect for tradition and elders. One particularly quirky tradition comes from Sweden, where knäckebröd, crisp bread, was often eaten with a spoon, not to scoop, but to help push the bread into your mouth. Historians still debate how this strange practice developed, but it's a reminder that spoons adapt in unexpected ways depending on culture. There's even a debate about how spoons affected table layouts and furniture design. As spoons became more common, dining tables grew larger to accommodate all the utensils, plates, and glasses. This little utensil literally helped shape social spaces and gatherings. So next time you nervously fumble your spoon at a fancy dinner, remember, you're part of a centuries-old dance of manners and symbolism. Let's continue to drift gently deeper into the fascinating world of spoons, this time exploring their role in social rituals and customs that might surprise you. Spoons, as simple as they seem, have long been entwined with human connection and symbolism, particularly when it comes to sharing meals and marking special occasions. One of the most intriguing uses of spoons can be found in the tradition of wishing spoons, or lucky spoons, a custom that persists in various cultures around the world. In Wales, for example, there is the famous love spoon tradition, dating back centuries. Carved meticulously from a single piece of wood, these spoons were not intended for eating, but as romantic gifts. A man would craft a love spoon for his beloved, embedding symbols like hearts, wheels, or bells into the handle to express feelings and intentions. The complexity of the carving often indicated the depth of his affection. Today, love spoons are cherished keepsakes and wedding gifts, reminding us that even the humblest utensil can carry a powerful message of love. In other parts of Europe and Asia, spoons have been used in wedding ceremonies, where a shared spoon symbolizes unity and shared life. For example, in some Slavic cultures, the bride and groom feed each other with a special spoon during the reception, signaling mutual care and partnership. Similarly, in traditional Korean ceremonies, spoons are part of the ritual table setting, representing prosperity and health. Beyond romance, spoons have also played a role in social status and etiquette. In medieval Europe, owning a personal spoon was a mark of wealth, since communal eating utensils were common among peasants. Nobles carried ornate spoons made from silver or gold, sometimes engraved with their family crests. These precious spoons not only served practical use, but were displayed proudly at feasts and banquets. Historians still debate whether some designs held hidden political messages or were simply decorative. There's also the curious tale of the spoon theory in social psychology. Although unrelated to eating utensils, this metaphor describes how people with chronic illness allocate limited energy spoons each day. The phrase has grown popular and helps explain invisible struggles. It's a fascinating linguistic twist, where spoons symbolize something entirely different, but connected to daily life and personal resources. On a lighter note, spoons have inspired playful superstitions. For instance, in some cultures, dropping a spoon is considered a sign that a guest is arriving soon or that good fortune is on the way. Whether true or not, these little beliefs show how spoons become part of the folklore woven into daily existence. So, next time you hold a spoon, remember it's not just a tool, but a bearer of love stories, traditions, social clues, and even superstition. A tiny object loaded with meaning. As you continue to relax into the gentle rhythm of this tale, let's explore another intriguing chapter in the life of spoons, their transformation during the Industrial Revolution and the remarkable impact it had on their availability and design. You might not expect that such a humble utensil would be caught up in one of history's most dramatic shifts, but spoons were very much part of the sweeping changes that reshaped society. Before factories and mass production, spoons were mostly handmade by skilled artisans, silversmiths, woodworkers, or potters, each piece unique. This meant spoons were relatively expensive and often reserved for the wealthy. However, the rise of the Industrial Revolution in the 18th and 19th centuries brought new technology, allowing spoons to be produced in huge quantities at much lower costs. Factories equipped with machinery such as presses, rollers, and stamping tools could churn out thousands of spoons per day, drastically changing who could afford to own them. This period saw the birth of the mass-market spoon, accessible not only to the aristocracy, but to the burgeoning middle and working classes. Suddenly, owning a set of silver-plated or even steel spoons was no longer a luxury. It was becoming common household fare. This democratization of utensils reflects a broader story of industrialization improving living standards and consumer culture expanding rapidly. Design-wise, this era introduced some of the most enduring spoon styles. The fiddle pattern, popular in Victorian England, is a perfect example, characterized by its distinctive rounded handle that resembles a fiddle's neck. The pattern's simple elegance made it a favorite, and it remains a classic to this day. Factories could replicate this style perfectly, ensuring consistency and appealing to taste for refinement without the high cost. Yet, this shift brought new challenges. Quality sometimes suffered as production prioritized quantity, and some spoons were prone to bending or tarnishing quickly. Historians still argue whether the Industrial Revolution's rush to mechanization sacrificed craftsmanship and character in utensils. For collectors today, spoons from this era can be fascinating artifacts that straddle the line between tradition and modernity. Interestingly, alongside silver and steel, new materials began to emerge. The late 19th century saw the introduction of aluminum spoons, light, durable, and corrosion resistant, though they were initially met with skepticism. Imagine the surprise of a Victorian diner when served soup with an aluminum spoon. It would have seemed futuristic, even alien. By the early 20th century, spoons had become ubiquitous kitchen companions worldwide, a testament to industrial progress and evolving social habits. They weren't just eating tools anymore, but objects symbolizing modern life's accessibility. So, as you imagine the clatter of factory floors and the hands of countless workers shaping millions of spoons, you're witnessing a quiet revolution in dining history, one that made this everyday object a staple of tables everywhere. As we near the end of our slow journey through the history and symbolism of spoons, it's time to explore some of the quirkiest and most unexpected ways spoons have made their mark, both in folklore and the odd corners of history where truth blurs with legend. Did you know that spoons have been involved in superstitions and folk beliefs? For centuries, in various cultures, spoons were thought to hold protective powers. In some European villages, it was common to hang silver spoons above doorways to ward off evil spirits. The belief was that the gleaming metal would reflect harmful energies, much like mirrors were said to do. Some still debate whether these practices were genuine spiritual rituals or simply clever ways to keep valuable silverware safe from thieves. There's also the curious case of the spoon war. No, it's not what you think. This wasn't a battle fought with spoons as weapons, but rather a quirky historical dispute involving the ownership and trade of spoons as prized commodities. In 17th century England, spoon making became such a lucrative trade that local guilds fiercely guarded their secrets, sometimes even resulting in legal disputes over who had the right to produce certain designs. These battles highlight how something so simple could trigger quite intense competition. And what about spoons in literature and art? Some authors and artists use spoons as metaphors for mundane life's comforts, or conversely, for the constraints of routine and domesticity. For example, in the 19th century novel The Spooning Spoon, the utensil becomes a symbol of societal expectations placed on women, how a simple spoon could represent the slow suffocation of individuality under tradition. Historians argue whether this metaphor was widely understood at the time, or if it was more of a subtle critique from the author's perspective. Spoons have also played a role in some fascinating rituals. In Russian folklore, spoons were sometimes used in traditional wedding ceremonies, where couples would exchange carved spoons as symbols of their union. The number and design of spoons exchanged could signify the couple's future prosperity or fertility, intertwining the humble utensil with hopes for a fruitful life together. Now, you probably didn't expect spoons to carry so much weight in cultural symbolism, but that's part of their charm. They quietly thread through our lives, carrying stories that go beyond the kitchen. As you settle deeper into rest, imagine the countless hands that have held a spoon, the whispered wishes made over family meals, and the secret messages carved into wood or silver. Historians still debate exactly when spoons began to carry these cultural meanings. But one thing is clear. The spoon is more than a tool. It's a tiny storyteller, a keeper of tradition, and sometimes even a spark of magic. Now, as we arrive at the final stretch of our soothing exploration into the world of spoons, let's take a moment to reflect on the humble spoon's remarkable journey. From simple carved sticks to the polished silver and stainless steel utensils that grace our tables today. It's a story not just of function, but of artistry, culture, and human connection. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, spoon manufacturing underwent a revolution thanks to the Industrial Revolution. Factories began churning out spoons in vast quantities, making them affordable for nearly every household. This shift marked a turning point as spoons became ubiquitous symbols of modern dining and everyday life. Yet, even with mass production, artisans continued crafting elaborate spoons for special occasions, engraved, gilded, and cherished as family heirlooms. Think about the spoons you may have inherited or gifted. Each one likely carries a story, perhaps a wedding gift spoon, or a souvenir from a faraway place. These little tokens connect us across generations, a shared touchpoint amid the constant flow of life. There's also a quieter, more personal history in spoons. The comforting spoonfuls of soup when you're ill, the gentle stirring of a morning tea, the ritual of breaking bread and sharing a meal with loved ones. Spoons hold moments of care and intimacy, invisible but deeply felt. Historians still argue about the true origins of some spoon forms, but what remains indisputable is the universal role spoons play in human culture. Whether humble or ornate, they bridge the practical and the poetic. As you drift further into calm, picture the simple elegance of a spoon resting in a bowl, catching soft candlelight or the morning sun. Let its quiet presence